You ever do that at the gas station? Like they say, do you want a receipt? And I always say yes, because somehow I feel it's going to stop them from cheating me. I don't know if anybody's like that. I know it's not true. I'm just kind of kidding. Okay. Anybody else? Permission to record? All right, James, you've got your thumbs up. Is that the same thing as a hands up?
No, sorry, didn't go away.
Okay, let's go. All right, let's go back here. We'll do this quickly. Okay, so then they'll think it's like real. Okay, here we go. Bless you.
Thank you.
Okay. What is limnology? Limnology is lake ecology. It's ecology of lakes. It's the study of the biology of things that are in lakes, fish, invertebrates, algae, protozoans, plants. It's the study of the physics that goes on within lakes, the distribution of heat, the melting of ice, the warming of water, the distribution of light, it declines exponentially with depth, and that really influences the algae, right? And water movement, right? During the spring and the fall, lakes mix entirely top to bottom. There's just water movement everywhere. But in the summer, lakes tend to stratify. And what that means is the water at the top of the lake will mix, driven by the wind, and the water at the bottom of the lake will mix sort of slowly. But really the bottom and the top don't mix with each other. That's stratification. And limnologists love stratification. And limnology is also the study of the chemistry of what's going on in lakes. Oxygen, which is obviously very important for things like fish and zooplankton. The salinity of lakes, which is very important to the algae and also to the fish, the pH, phosphorus, nitrogen, other nutrients. So limnology is ecology, and it really studies all of these things, the biology, the chemistry, and the physics of lakes. Now, limnology is important not just because lakes are wonderful, but limnology is important to people in a variety of different ways that you may not have thought about. For example, for many people in the world, lakes are a key part of the drinking water supply. In fact, that's true in the city of St. Paul. If you live in St. Paul, the drinking water that comes out of the taps has flowed through a chain of lakes. Now, originally it was rain, and it landed on the ground, and it flowed into the Mississippi River. And then there's a pipe that goes from the Mississippi River around like Coon Rapids above Minneapolis, upstream. And the pipe comes over to Vadnais Lake, the Vadnais chain of lakes north of the city of St. Paul. It goes through the lakes and then it goes down a pipe. This is Vadnais Lake here, a beautiful lake. Here's the water intake structure, and the water goes in here and down through a pipe to the McCarran's water treatment plant, and then out to the people of St. Paul. And the passage of this water through this chain of lakes cleans the water. But it's also important to keep the lakes clean so that the water gets cleaner as it goes through and not, worse. Now, lakes are also important, not just as a source of water for people, but for many people, lakes are a source of food. And there are many places on Earth, many places in the world, in which, excuse me, fish from lakes are a significant source of protein and calories for people. I was looking on a Wikipedia page, or I looked at the United Nations page too, and they said that there are 38 million people worldwide directly employed in fishing, commercial fishing and fish farming, and 50 million people total employed in these fisheries and aquaculture. And some famous lakes in which fishing is a big source of food include Lake Victoria and Lake Tanganyika in Africa, you may have heard about, and also Cambodia and other places in the world. And so fish don't just come from oceans, they also come from lakes. Now, in Minnesota, of course, we're very aware of the role that lakes play in the culture of Minnesota. They're a place where people engage in outdoor recreation, skating, hockey, pond hockey, ice fishing. Um, and they're not just important for us as a place to go outdoors and have recreation, boating. I'm thinking summer too, right? Boating, swimming, sailing, windsurfing, canoeing, um, fishing. Yeah, summer fishing. These are important not only because they're healthy recreational activities, but they're also things that people pay good money to come to Minnesota to take advantage of. So there's actually a tourist industry in Minnesota that depends on our having attractive lakes. And woven into this, because this has been going on for 100 years in its kind of modern, 150 years in its sort of modern form, but way farther back even. It's a big part of the cultural and natural heritage of Minnesota. After all, Minnesota has a state fish. And the success of the state fish populations, the walleye in Mille Lacs and some of the other big lakes are front page news as the population of walleye goes up or down. And there's good reason for that. I mean, isn't this beautiful? Where else in the world are there ice fishing contests? Okay, other places. They have ice fishing contests in Russia and northern Scandinavia. They have ice fishing contests in Maine, in Ontario. But the ice fishing contests in Minnesota are a big part of a certain strand of the Minnesota state culture. This is yeah, look at all those people out there. It's amazing. And of course, Minnesota has a state grain, wild rice, which grows in lakes in Minnesota. And that's an important food source. It's an important industry, but it's also really important as part of the cultural history of Minnesota. Lakes are also really kind of interesting, and they face challenges. I would like to just show you a short video of some newsworthy thing related to limnology, and I hope this is going to work here. You ready for this?
Giant jumping fish. It's a familiar sight here of the waters leading towards Lake Michigan. They're called Asian carp, and they can grow up to 4 foot long. This canal is all that stands in the way between the Asian carp and the Great Lakes up there. That's why they built this control center to send electrical pulses into the water to stop the carp from getting any further. But some say that on its own, this electrical barrier won't be enough, and are calling for more drastic measures. The fish have infested the Mississippi River and are now not far from the Great Lakes. The US Army Corps of Engineers have proposed blocking the canal system at various points here. It could cost up to $18 billion.
There's 9.1 million people in Chicago in a matter of a little over 100 years. That canal's been there. The economic impact is considerable.
Another cheaper option is to mince up the fish and eat them out of existence. Here, fishmonger Dirk Fuchik is making burgers out of the carp. I can't wait to try
There
it.
you have a world famous Dirk's Fish Carp Burger. And that's the cheese stuff going.
That's really nice.
It's good, right? I mean,
The carp invasion of the Great Lakes is a problem that will affect the rest of the world.
20% of the world's fresh water is in the Great Lakes. We've seen effects from invasive species, which has also led to effects of climate change. We obviously want to protect this one-time natural resource. From an economic standpoint, again, I think that what you'll find is in order to keep invasive species out, US and Canadian policy and laws may make it harder to do shipping down the line that maybe folks in the United Kingdom would rely on. make sure that their goods and services can get here, or it could increase it because it's going to cost more to transport.
The city and neighbouring states will have to find a solution soon. Some, though, believe that the fish are unstoppable. It's only a matter of time for these monstrous creatures make Great Lakes their new home. Ghosh, News, Chicago.
Oh. All right. Well, that's, obviously a current lake-related issue that has been in the news, the invasion of Asian carp. Several of these species, a couple of these species were introduced into the southern United States because they have this unique ability to eat plants. And the idea was, there were kind of different ideas, but one of them was, well, we could use these carp to kind of reduce our weed problem in the lakes. But the problem is that the carp escaped and get everywhere, and they eat plants they're not supposed to eat, and they're heading upstream, and they knock people out of boats and jump and, whatnot. And, these invasive carp have been caught as far north as Lake Pepin, down in the Winona, Wabasha area, and they're clearly heading upstream. And, a big fish like that can cause enormous impacts on a food web. They compete with the native fish. They they eat the plants, they rip up the plants, they stir up the mud, which fertilizes the lake. Nutrients that were trapped in the mud are getting stirred up by the carp. And then this causes eutrophication of the lake. So there's several different reasons why these invasive introduced carp species are of concern. And there was just something in the paper a week or two ago about the latest attempts to block their range expansion. So now you may find that that is a reason to care about the ecology of lakes because of the the economic impact of things like introduced fish, or perhaps you like the idea of eating a cheese-stuffed carp burger. I've seen him eat that burger 4 or 5 times now, and I guess I'm starting to get a little curious, but maybe not enough that I would go to Chicago to find out. And the sort of fifth and final reason that I would give you for why lakes are important to people is because of the role that lakes play in the global carbon cycle. Obviously, rising carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere are causing warming of the earth, atmosphere, and ocean, global warming from increased greenhouse effect. And lakes have a role in regulating the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. CO2 dissolves in water. If it's incorporated into the algae and the algae sink to the bottom, then the algae take that carbon with them. And if the sediment is not stirred up, then that carbon that lands on the bottom of the lake stays there. Lake sediment accumulates year after year after year, and whatever it's carried down into the sediment, it keeps there. This is true for lakes. This is true for the ocean. It's not generally true for rivers, because of course, the flowing water is constantly eroding what is deposited. But in addition to this kind of general function as a place where carbon goes and gets buried, sometimes what happens in lakes is that the decomposition of the organic matter, the algae, they fall to the bottom, they decompose. Sometimes what happens is that happens under anaerobic conditions, no oxygen. And if you have anaerobic decomposition of organic matter, you end up with, instead of oxidized products like carbon dioxide, you end up with reduced kinds of things like methane, right? CH4, no oxygen in that, right? Methane. This is particularly an issue in, Arctic lakes, and perhaps you know a thing or two about methane, but I would like to show you another video. I have to admit, we're not going to do this, okay? In class, we're not going to do this, but they did it, and I'd like you to watch what they've done and think about it.
We have cleared the snow off the surface of the lake, and in order to see methane bubbles that are in the lake ice. And if you look at the shore, you can see that there are lots of trees that are falling in the lake and they're dying. What's happening is the permafrost is thawing. The ice that was in the ground, when it melts, causes the ground surface to collapse. When the forest falls in and any organic matter, dead plant and animal remains that were in the permafrost, thaw out in the bottom of the lake, microbes decompose it and it generates methane. And methane doesn't like to stay in water in solution. It forms bubbles, and those bubbles make their way to the surface. In the summertime, the bubbles pop and they enter the atmosphere. In the winter, however, this ice forms a cover on the surface of the lake. The bubbles get trapped right under the ice, and the ice thickens and freezes around them. So what we have out here is like a time-lapse photograph of methane emissions from the lake. Methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. A molecule of methane is 25 times stronger than carbon dioxide. Methane is formed in millions of lakes around the Arctic where permafrost is thawing. And each year, these lakes are emitting already tremendous amounts of methane. But when we look at how much carbon is in permafrost still frozen, and the potential for that permafrost to thaw in the future, we estimate that more than 10 times the amount of methane that's right now in the atmosphere will come out of these lakes.
Oh, okay. Now, if that doesn't convince you that limnology is important and interesting, I really don't know what's going to persuade you, because what's better than, you know, leaping fish and, you know, flaming lake deposits? Obviously, limnology is an integrated kind of science. It's interdisciplinary. In order to understand this topic that they were just talking about in this video from Fairbanks, Alaska, we're talking about methane, which is a chemical, which is produced by decomposition of organic matter, which is obviously living stuff. And the reason that we care about it so much is because of its impact on the heat balance of the Earth, global warming, greenhouse effect, which is physics. So I think maybe you can see that some of the really important issues related to limnology integrate all of these, or several different subdisciplines: biology, chemistry, physics, social science and biology, economics and biology. A lot of these things come together in the important issues that limnologists deal with. Okay, what I would like to do now is talk to you a little bit about how to be a good student. Now, if you've read the syllabus, you know that I recommend the recall method. Now, the recall method has been studied quite a bit, I think, sufficiently over the last 10 years or so, and it's really been convincingly demonstrated to be a powerful study method, a powerful method for learning and retaining information. And what the studies I have seen have been things like this, where they take a bunch of students and they give them a lecture, or they give them something to read that they're supposed to learn from. And everybody reads the same stuff or sees the same lecture. Some of them are then asked to look over their notes before they take a test. Others are asked to do the recall method. So we got our control group and our treatment group. And in the recall method, what you do is you close your notes, you close the book, and you write down everything you can remember. You recall it. You call it up into your mind again. You just try to remember everything you can and you write it down. And then they take these two groups of students, the ones who looked over their notes again or looked over the book again or whatever, and the people who did the recall, and they give them a test. And who do you think does better? The ones who did the recall method. Now, looking over your notes is better than doing nothing, so maybe doing nothing is the true control. But if you're comparing these two treatments, there's a little bar graph here, the two treatments, the recall method, time and again in study after study, outperforms the sort of review kind of method. So it's sort of recalling versus reviewing. Or some people would say this is self-testing. Rather than just looking it over again and you go, oh yeah, that looks familiar. Oh yeah, I remember that. Oh yeah, I remember that. That is not as effective as trying to answer questions, trying to write down what you remember. Because then you're like, yeah, ever had that feeling? And then you like look at your notes, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna practice right now. And what I would like you to do right now, we're gonna practice the recall method. You just had a lecture on why limnology is important. What I would like you to do right now don't look at the PowerPoint, even if you have access to it, whatever. Write down 5 reasons given in this lecture for why limnology is important. If you took notes, don't look at your notes, just try to remember. All right, so I'm gonna give you, 2 minutes for you to write down what you can remember from this little lecture about why limnology is important, okay? I'm gonna start a little timer here. Don't look at your notes, just try to remember. What did you see? All right, so that's 2 minutes. I don't know how many you got out of this. I will say, if you're like me, you start remembering what it is, and it's difficult. You start trying to remember and write it down, but it's hard, almost painful. And it's very hard to resist the urge to just go and look it up. But the thing is that when you go and you look it up, it's easy and you don't learn. But that struggle, that mental pain you feel from trying to remember, that is learning. You know, it's like if you're lifting weights and it's too heavy, so you put it down or you get someone to come over and help you, well, you're not going to get any stronger. You know, so it's this mental effort focused in this very constructive way, productive way. I recommend that you do this, you know, anytime you have a class at Metro State and there's a lecture. At the end of the lecture, it doesn't have to be right away, but before you sleep, write down everything you can remember. And take a little time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, write down everything you can remember. It doesn't have to be a long amount of time, definitely much shorter than the lecture itself. Write down everything you can remember. And you'll notice some things you remember and some things you don't really remember. You remember it was talked about, but you don't remember what was said. Or there's gaps. Write down everything you can remember, and when you're done, then look at your notes and you can fill in the blanks with the stuff you don't remember. The act of pulling it back up into your mind helps process the information in a way that leads to the formation of the neural connections that are the encoding of memory. So there's a neurological basis for this, a neuropsych basis for this. I totally recommend that you do this. Anytime that you have a lecture, anytime you read a chapter, read an assigned reading, do this. And you will find that, you know, these studies show that this information is retained better. Now, I don't know that it works like 6 months later, you're suddenly magically still going to remember it. But so I don't know what the time lag, whatever is a curve of it is. But definitely in terms of like the next couple of days, the next week or so, this method totally helps. So I'm recommending this. In the syllabus, I've also given a couple of references that you can go and learn more about it. They're a couple years old now. I think there's been more research too to follow up on it, but those early references are still valid. Okay, so one of the things that I want to teach you in this course before it's too late is how to be a good student and some skill that's going to enable you to be a good student, to make the most efficient use of your study time. Because it's not just more time, it's what you do with the time when you study. So one of these big things is the recall method, very effective. Second thing I want to talk about is discussion. When I've surveyed students that passed in my classes, what study methods did you use during the semester? I give them a whole long list of different study methods, and I give them some free answer space to describe what they do when they study. And then I take all of the, I've done this, taken all of the student responses and compared them to their grades. And I'll tell you, one of the things that really jumped out at me, the single stark difference. The students who did really well all discussed the course material outside of the class time. There's something about discussing the course material that really helps people to learn it. Now, I think some of that has got to be it's got to be because of the same neurological mechanism involved in recall. Like when you're talking with somebody, stuff comes into your mind and you say it. And they say something and you're like, oh yeah, I remember that, but what I remember was this, right? You're not just like looking at something and reading it out loud or looking at it and copying it down or highlighting it, right? You're pulling it into your memory. So there's something about discussion that helps to process and form memories of things. It's also good to talk to somebody who knows, you know, stuff like you do, because then when you've misunderstood something, they'll catch you. You'll say blah, 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 and they'll say, really, I thought it was blah, blah, blah. And anytime you and this other person disagree about something, well, at least one of you's wrong, right? And that's what you want to find out. You want to find out if you got something wrong, if you're thinking it, you got the wrong idea, right? You want to find that out not during the exam. You want to find that out like when you're studying. Okay, so I believe that discussion is the second big key to being a really good student. And what I would like you to do now is I would like you to, oh gosh, can we even do this in this class? Yes, I'm going to team you up using breakout rooms. And I just want you to compare your list, the 5 things you came up with, to what another student came up with. Oh, you know what? I just looked at the clock and I don't want to do that because that's going to take a couple minutes. Okay, but you could do this, right? You've got a list, they got a list, you compare them, and you'll be matching, they'll be different, you'll learn something. Okay, let's move on. That's the end of this introduction to the class. Now I want to give you a short lecture that is an introduction to lakes. Do you have any questions about this kind of, introduction to the course and the general subject of lake ecology, why it's interesting and important, and 2 study methods? Any questions about any of this topic? Zaid.
Yeah, I don't see this PowerPoint in the V12.
That's correct.
Oh, okay.
But I will put it up there after class.
Oh, okay.
Okay, other questions? All right. What I'm going to do now is open, oh, not that. One sec here. There we go. Always something new. Here we go. Okay. Back to Zoom. Back to screen share. Where'd that go? Share screen. Here we go. Yeah. All right. Here's a little introduction to lakes of Minnesota and lakes of the world. What are lakes? Well, the Earth is a great blue ball, but most of the blueness is actually ocean. What are lakes? Well, lakes can be deep. There's deepest parts of the ocean. They can be big. Obviously, the ocean is bigger. They could be freshwater. They could be saltwater. Could be somewhere in between. Actually, there are lakes that are saltier than the ocean. So that's not part of the definition. Lakes can be small as 10 hectares, or they can be really, really big, like more than 10,000 square kilometers in size. Lakes can be young. Most lakes on Earth are about 10,000 years old, or they could be very old. There are lakes on Earth that are millions of years old. Now, if we were just to look at North America, there are 5 major areas in North America that have a large number of natural lakes. Florida, down here, here's Florida, has a lot of lakes. The Pacific Northwest up here has a lot of lakes. The Great Lakes region, if we were to include everything from like, well, I guess we call this the Great Lakes region, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, lots of lakes, Ontario, all the way even up to there. The Adirondack Mountains here in upstate New York have a lot of lakes. And so does the Arctic. I think you can even see some of the really big lakes up here in the Arctic. So there may be 5 areas that have large numbers of lakes, and they have lakes of different types in these different areas. Lakes are formed by a variety of different mechanisms, and Calf explains these in detail. Most lakes on Earth are caused by glaciers. And the end of the last ice age was about 18,000 years ago, 15, something like that. And as it retreated, it left an uneven earth surface. And places that were low have become lakes, and places that become high are in between the lakes. There are some lakes that were caused by glaciers pushing the ground, but that's kind of rare compared to lakes that are created really by the unevenness of the ground left behind. There are lakes caused by tectonic forces. That's the plates of the earth, the tectonic plates, and places where the plates have separated and a large part of the earth surface has fallen. That's a depression that fills with water, and the biggest, deepest lakes on earth are tectonic in origin. Rivers have created a lot of lakes on earth. Rivers that are slow moving and get more and more squiggly, right? At some point, a lake is so squiggly that a rain makes it take a shortcut, and one of those like bows outward gets stranded and left behind, and that becomes a lake called an oxbow lake. There are a lot of oxbow lakes on the Mississippi River and the Minnesota River, as they, Mississippi River in particular, north of the Twin Cities, as it wiggles its way through, say, Aiken County and so on. Rivers can also cause lakes in other rivers. If you've got one river that flows in and carries a lot of sand and debris with it, when it hits the other river, it can create a dam, damming the river, the other river. Lake Pepin is such a river, such a lake. Some places underneath the surface is sedimentary rock, limestone rock, which has been dissolved by the carbonic acid in rainwater, forming caves and channels and tunnels. And when those collapse, they can form sinkholes or even lakes. The lakes that are in Florida are primarily of this origin. I've been searching for lakes of this type in Minnesota. I have not yet found any. The only ones I've found down in Fillmore County have been too small to really count as lakes or too temporary, but I'm still searching. I think there will be one, at least one somewhere in Minnesota. And of course, volcanoes, when they erupt, if they leave behind a crater that fills with water, such as Crater Lake in Oregon, or several of the lakes in West Africa, they can be very deep, high elevation lakes, volcanic in origin. And of course, humans cause lakes by damming things. That would be anthropogenic, human origin lakes, ponds, reservoirs, farm ponds. Let's just talk a little bit about glacial lakes in Minnesota. Obviously, at the peak of the last glaciation, most of Minnesota was covered with ice. This is where the ice was located at its peak. You can see that it extended down into Iowa, but it didn't cover this corner of the state of Minnesota, or even that corner either. And where the glacier reached at its peak, it left behind piles and piles of gravel and other ripped up rock particles that were carried along by the sliding ice. And when the ice melted, it left that stuff behind. And so you see places where the edge of a glacier was, or the end of the glacier was, something called a moraine, an end moraine or a side moraine, and lots of lakes in those areas. This is kind of a diagram showing, the sliding of the ice. And this was the Des Moines lobe, and there were other lobes, and people study this. Glaciers at the end about 14,000 years ago. And they did not cover, the southwest corner of the state or the southeast corner of the state because they are higher elevation. As you see here, that's pretty high elevation. This is higher elevation. And so it kind of diverted the ice sheet in between. So these parts of the state were not covered by the most recent glaciation. They are not covered with this glacial debris, these meters and meters and meters of ground up rock deposited by the glaciers. Minnesota is the land of 10,000 lakes. Actually, there's more than, 15,000 lakes, depending on how big you define a lake to be. Now, a hectare is a square, 100 meters on each side. In Minnesota, counts a thing as a lake if it's more than 4 hectares in area. That's pretty small by international standards. How many lakes are there bigger than 4 hectares in the state of Minnesota? Well, it depends on who you ask. There used to be said to be about 12,034, but some of them have been drained and so on. And the new latest count, I think, is maybe 11,842, but it does change over time as some of these small lakes get drained or redammed or something. I'd like to know if anybody knows which county in Minnesota has the most lakes. I would like someone to guess, anyone, what county in Minnesota has the greatest number of lakes?
St. Louis.
Good guess. No. Another guess? So this is St. Louis. St. Louis is a good guess. Lots of lakes in St. Louis, and it's a very big county. No? All right. Otter Tail over here. Otter Tail County right here. This has the greatest number of lakes in the state, and it also has the greatest area of lakes. 11% of the surface area of Otter Tail County is lakes. So when people talk about Lake District in Minnesota, this is a big lake district over here. Counties with no lakes. Anybody want to name a single county that has no lakes? Can you name any of these? Well, 2 counties down here. Oh, my pointer go. 2 counties down here in the southwest corner, Pipestone and Rock County, and 2 or 3 counties right in here. Now, right along the river, there are riverine lakes, but if you get inland from there, Mower County and Olmsted County are said to be free of lakes. I think Fillmore has no lakes also. That's in between. These are down here. Forestville, Mystery Cave, down there. Deepest lakes in Minnesota? Anybody want to guess? What's the deepest lake in Minnesota? Just guess.
Red Lake?
Red Lake, good guess. That's big, but it's not very deep. Biggest lakes, of course, Lake Superior, Saginaw, although I think the deepest point is not within Minnesota, and the Crosby Mine Pit, which is not really a lake, but is extremely deep. How about the deepest natural lakes in Minnesota? Well, I bet you don't know these because none of them is particularly famous, but 10 Mile Lake, Lower LaSalle, which are out by Itasca, and Loon Lake, which is in the Boundary Waters. And they're really, it's hard to say exactly how deep they are, but they're all a little bit over 200 feet deep. How about the biggest lakes in Minnesota? Well, the ones you can see on this map, right? Lake of the Woods, Upper and Lower Red Lake, Mille Lacs, Leech Lake, Winnebagoshus. Superior, not entirely in Minnesota. Entirely within Minnesota, here are the biggest lakes. A bunch of these are lakes we will mention again. I will post this on D2L for you. Minnesota, of course, is famous for having 3 watersheds, meaning water that falls up in the northwest corner of the state, flows into the Red River, and up into Hudson Bay. Water that flows in the Twin Cities flows into the Mississippi River and down to the Gulf of Mexico. Water that flows in Gooseberry State Park, you know, the lakes along the North Shore or the land across the North Shore flows into Lake Superior, and that flows out the St. Lawrence River through the Great Lakes out into the Atlantic Ocean. Now, the standard definition of a lake is a water body that's too deep for rooted plants and wide enough that the shore is windswept. Obviously, it could be fresh or salty and so on. So salinity is not part of the definition. Worldwide, well, that didn't work very well, did it? A little PowerPoint technique here. Worldwide, there are 19 Great Lakes. They hold half of all the lake water on Earth. They cover more than 1/3 of the surface area of lakes on Earth. And I was going to challenge you to name them, which obviously didn't work very well. Lake Baikal is the deepest. Lake Superior has the largest surface area. Lake Tanganyika is the second deepest and has the second largest volume. It's really big. What is the largest lake on Earth? Anybody happen to know? It's called the Caspian Sea. It is so big, and it is the largest lake on Earth. It's also saltwater, but it is not connected to the oceans. So it is not part of the ocean system. These top lakes here, these freshwater lakes, Baikal, Superior, and Tanganyika, and you combine them, they include almost half of all of the fresh lake water on Earth. So most lakes on Earth are small, but most lake water is in a few really big lakes. Now, see, this totally didn't work. Most lakes on Earth are small, but most of the water is in a few really big ones. Anybody want to guess what country on Earth has the greatest number of lakes? Just guess.
Canada.
That's an excellent guess. Canada's number 2 because Russia probably has more, but the difference is Canada has counted them. Russia has more surface area, as you can tell from like satellite photos, but in terms of like actually naming and numbering the lakes, they don't have it done, so probably Canada. Some lakes are millions of years old. I think I mentioned Lake Baikal and Victoria as tectonic. Most lakes, however, are young, glacial in origin. Some lakes are in the tropics. Some famous lakes include Tanganyika and Nicaragua. Most lakes are at high elevation. Russia, Canada, Scandinavia. Caspian Sea, and this is my last slide, is the largest lake on Earth. It's so big it's called a sea. Here's the Caspian Sea, like it's really big, but it is not part of the ocean system, right? Water flows in, water flows out. It doesn't circulate connected to the ocean. That's what I have to say in my introduction to lakes. I will, like I said, post this on D2L. I posted Lab 1. I will post a study guide. Do you have any questions? Catherine says no. Okay, well, I guess. All right, that's right. All right. All right, so that's what I have for you today. For our first day, we did a lot of stuff. Did we do everything? Yeah, we did a lot of stuff. We will have our first lab tomorrow. For basically labs, you write lab reports. We're going to collect lab data tomorrow. And then next Tuesday, we'll talk about how to write the lab report. I would rather not have done a lab in the very first week, but the forecast for Thursday this week is way better than the current forecast for next week. So, you know, all right, yes, June.
So a quick question.
Sure.
You said tomorrow, but you mean Thursday,
I
right?
meant Thursday.
Okay, cool.
Thanks for checking. June, you got a question?
Oh yeah, I was just wondering when lab reports were due.
The general rule is the following week, 1 week later.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? All right, well, that's what I have for you today. I really like to end class exactly at 4, so I feel bad that we ran over a little bit. I will, in the future, be aiming to end it start at exactly 1 and end at exactly 4, in case you were wondering. All right, other questions? You're free to go.